I stood before the mirror in the bridal suite of the Grand Regency Hotel, but instead of the white wedding dress that had cost a fortune, I wore an elegant black gown. My hair was styled to perfection, my makeup flawless. Behind me, the untouched designer dress hung on its custom hanger, meant for a bride who had no intention of wearing it. Downstairs, the sounds of the wedding filled the air, guests arriving, champagne glasses clinking, the orchestra rehearsing the processional. Everything was moving exactly as planned. But the wedding planner had no idea that the schedule had changed. This was my carefully orchestrated event now. I turned slightly, inspecting myself from another angle. The dress was perfect, satin, sleek, and form-fitting. It was the exact opposite of the dress hanging behind me, the one I had pretended to gush over when Alex and I had gone dress shopping. He had smiled so smugly when I had chosen the lace-covered princess gown, twirling before the mirror like the perfect little bride. His words echoed in my head. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride anyone has ever seen." A lie, one of many. Because while he was telling me I was the love of his life, that he couldn't wait to spend forever with me, that he had finally found his soulmate, he was writing a very different story behind my back. One that he had carefully planned with Monica. I still remember the exact moment I found out. The way my fingers had hesitated over the invitation, my stomach twisting with an unnamed dread. It had been hidden in the back of his desk drawer, as if it were some long-forgotten document he had meant to throw away. But Alex didn't make careless mistakes. He had hidden it there on purpose. A test, maybe. A way to see if I was foolish enough to find it and still say nothing. I had sat there for a long time, reading his words over and over, tracing the ink with my fingers as my mind tried to make sense of it. Front row, left side. I need you there. This day will be unforgettable. I had swallowed back the nausea, willing my hands to stop shaking. Then, for the first time in our relationship, I had lied to him. I had smiled when he got home that night, kissed him as if nothing had changed. I had let him hold me in bed, his hands warm against my skin, his breathing slow and steady as he fell asleep beside me. And the next morning, while he left for work, I had started looking for the truth. I hadn't expected to find much at first. A text message, maybe. A late-night call. But the more I searched, the deeper the betrayal ran. Bank statements, hotel reservations, a second phone hidden in his gym bag. Messages that made me sick to my stomach. "You'll always be my first choice, Mon. This is just for the show. She won't see it coming. I need her to play her part. Just wait for the signal." The signal. I had spent weeks trying to figure out exactly what that meant. When Monica would stand up, how Alex would react, how he had planned every little detail to make himself look like the victim. And I had almost confronted him. Almost screamed in his face, thrown the evidence at him, demanded to know how he could do this to me. But I didn't. Instead, I rewrote the script. Now, standing in front of the mirror, I smoothed my hands over the satin of my black dress. There was a kind of poetry in this, wasn't there? The jilted bride, walking into her own wedding wearing mourning colors. But I wasn't grieving. Not for Alex. Not for us. I turned from the mirror, walking to the vanity where my clutch lay waiting. Inside was everything I needed. A flash drive, carefully loaded with more than just text messages. *TS, emails, recorded conversations. Copies of financial transfers that shouldn't have existed. And a note. Not from me. From Alex. A breakup letter he had written weeks ago. Not to me. To Monica. Because while I had been planning my revenge, Alex had been planning his own betrayal. It turned out that Monica wasn't the grand love of his life after all. She was just a pawn in his game. A convenient plot twist in the carefully curated story he wanted to tell. Monica would stand up, declare her love, and Alex would look surprised. He would hesitate, just for show, and then he would shake his head, take my hands, and tell the entire world that he had made his choice. Me. And Monica would be left standing there, humiliated. He had written both endings, waiting to see which one worked best. He had thought he was the mastermind. He had no idea he was playing in my game now. My phone buzzed on the vanity, a message lighting up the screen. "She's here. Front row, left side." wearing red, just like you said. Of course, she was. I smiled, slipping my phone into my clutch. Everything was in place. I walked to the window, looking down at the guests milling about in the courtyard, laughing, toasting, completely unaware of what was coming. My father was speaking with the officiant, his expression unreadable. He was the only one who knew. I had told him everything the night before. At first, he had been silent, gripping the edge of the kitchen table so hard his knuckles turned white. Then, without a word, he had stood, walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a drink. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, even. "Do you want me to handle this?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Then do it right." I had nodded, taking the glass from his hand and drinking it down in one burning gulp. And now it was time. A knock at the door. My cue. I picked up my clutch, taking one last look at the wedding dress hanging in the corner. Then, without hesitation, I turned away. The doors swung open, and I walked out. The moment I stepped out of the bridal suite, the energy shifted. The hotel staff, who had been bustling about, ensuring that everything was perfect for the bride, barely glanced at me. To them, I was just another guest, maybe a bridesmaid running late, or an important relative who had decided to make an entrance on her own terms. No one questioned the black dress. No one even looked at me twice. It was almost amusing. Everyone was so focused on the carefully curated illusion of a perfect wedding that they never saw the storm brewing at its center. I walked through the quiet hallways, my heels clicking against the marble floors, every step deliberate. My father was waiting for me just beyond the doors that led to the ceremony space. His face was unreadable, his hands folded in front of him as if he had been expecting this exact moment all along. In some ways, maybe he had. "She's here," he said, his voice low. I nodded. "Front row, left side." He sighed, shaking his head slightly. "You still have time to walk away from this." I almost laughed at that. Walk away? After everything? He knew me better than that. I wasn't the kind of woman who let betrayal pass quietly in the night. Alex had been so sure, so confident, thinking I would simply crumble when he pulled his stunt. But what he never understood was that I had been raised by a man who taught me that dignity wasn't about suffering in silence. Dignity was about knowing when to strike back. "This isn't about revenge," I said, and for once I meant it. "This is about control." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Then make sure you take it all." I adjusted my clutch under my arm, straightened my shoulders, and pushed through the double doors. The ceremony space was breathtaking. White roses lined the aisle, delicate glass lanterns flickered in soft candlelight, and a string quartet played something slow and elegant. Every detail was picture-perfect, a wedding worthy of a glossy magazine spread. I had planned this. I had chosen these flowers, these linens, these candle holders. Every decision had been made with care, every moment crafted to reflect the fairy tale Alex and I were supposed to share. And yet, I was the only one in black. I heard the whispers begin before I even reached the aisle. Heads turned, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd as guests took in the unexpected sight. A woman, not a bridesmaid, not a guest, but someone else, walking down the aisle in a dress that was not meant for a wedding. And then, the moment of realization. The gasps. The stunned silence. Monica's head snapped up first. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, sitting front row, left side, her crimson dress standing out like a warning sign. Her eyes met mine, widening as she took in my expression, my dress, the fact that I wasn't supposed to be here. And then, Alex turned. He was standing at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, looking exactly like the devoted groom he had pretended to be. But when his gaze landed on me, something flickered behind his eyes. Panic. He was quick to cover it up, to mask it with a carefully measured expression of confusion, but I had learned to read him better than he ever realized. He knew. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I didn't stop walking. I kept my steps slow, deliberate, measured. I let the silence stretch, let the tension tighten like a noose around his carefully constructed performance. He was waiting for me to say something, to explain myself, to react. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I turned to Monica. "Stand up," I said, my voice carrying through the cavernous room. A murmur rippled through the guests, the tension thick enough to choke. Monica hesitated. "What?" "Stand up." I wasn't asking. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her confusion painted across every inch of her face. Alex took a step forward. "Emily, what the hell is going on?" I turned to look at him, finally, and smiled. "Exactly what you planned, Alex." His face paled. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny, but I wasn't done. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the flash drive. It was small, barely noticeable in my hand, but its contents, they were everything. I turned toward the back of the room, where a projector had been set up for the wedding slideshow. A collection of childhood photos, engagement pictures, and carefully curated memories that were supposed to play after the vows. But not anymore. I lifted my hand, signaling the AV team, and the screen flickered to life. At first, it was nothing but silence. And then, his voice. "She won't see it coming. I need her to play her part." A ripple of gasps. The video began. Security footage of Alex and Monica. Private dinners. Hotel lobbies. His car parked outside her apartment at 2 in the morning. A recorded phone call. "I need this to be big, Mon. She has to believe it. She has to break down. That's how we make this work." Monica took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Alex." He turned to her, voice sharp. "Don't say a word." But the video wasn't over. "Just wait for the signal." And then, another recording. "You'll always be my first choice, Mon. This is just for the show." Silence. And then, the final blow. A letter. His letter. Not to me. To Monica. "I wish I could tell you this is real, but it's not. It never was. You were just the drama I needed to make this work. I had to make it look real, Mon. I had to convince everyone. But at the end of the day, Emily's the right choice. She's the one with the connections, the money, the power. I need that. And if this goes well, maybe I'll keep you around. Maybe." The words hung in the air, a slow, agonizing death sentence. Monica swayed on her feet. "You said," her voice cracked. "You said you loved me." Alex's hands clenched into fists. "Monica, you don't. You were going to humiliate me?" My voice cut through the chaos, sharp and unforgiving. "You were going to stand here and pretend to choose me, just so you could keep your hands clean?" He turned back to me, jaw tight. "Emily, let's go somewhere private. Let's talk." I smiled again, but this time, there was no warmth in it. "No, Emily." "No, Alex." I stepped forward, closing the space between us, my voice steady, my heartbeat calm. "You don't get to rewrite the story anymore." I reached into my clutch one last time and pulled out the second flash drive. The one with his financial records. The one that exposed everything. I let it dangle between my fingers, watching as his face finally registered what was happening. His world wasn't just crumbling. I was burning it down. Alex's face drained of color as he stared at the flash drive in my hand. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this meant. His betrayal, his scheming, his careful manipulation, it was all about to be ripped apart, not just in front of his family, but in front of colleagues, potential business investors, people whose opinions mattered, people whose trust he needed. He took a step forward, reaching for my wrist as if he could somehow make this all disappear. "Emily, give me that." I pulled my hand back before he could touch me, tilting my head as I studied him. The way his jaw clenched, the way his chest rose and fell too quickly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even embarrassed. He was terrified. "You thought you were in control," I said, my voice just loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "You thought you could script everything down to the final act." I could hear people whispering now. Family, friends, distant relatives, the upper-crust guests Alex had invited to flaunt his success. The CEO of the investment firm he had been chasing was seated 2 rows back. His college mentor, the man who had written his recommendation letter for his first job, sat near the aisle. They were watching, absorbing every second of this moment, and there was no way for Alex to spin it. Monica looked at me, then at Alex, her face pale with realization. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You were never going to leave her." Alex's head snapped toward her. "Monica, shut up." She flinched. I smiled at him, slow and deliberate. "Let her talk, Alex." He turned back to me, his expression shifting. He was trying to regain control, trying to smooth this over the way he always did. "I don't know what you think you found," he said, lowering his voice to something meant to sound reasonable, calm, like I was just a hysterical bride throwing a tantrum. "But whatever this is, we can handle it privately. Just you and me." I exhaled through my nose, nodding slightly. "Privately," I repeated, rolling the word around on my tongue like I was considering it. Then I walked toward the podium at the altar. I turned toward the guests, toward everyone, and lifted the microphone from its stand. The hush that fell over the room was absolute. Alex's breath hitched audibly. "I was supposed to walk down this aisle today," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I was supposed to say my vows. I was supposed to smile and promise myself to a man who planned to publicly humiliate me at the altar." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. A few gasps. A woman on Alex's side covered her mouth. Alex moved fast, coming up behind me, his hand reaching for the microphone. "Enough, Emily." I twisted out of reach, raising my free hand in a casual, dismissive gesture. No. You wanted a show, Alex. Enjoy it." I turned back to the audience, smiling warmly like I was giving a toast. "See, Alex didn't just want to break up with me. That would have been too simple. Too clean. He wanted something bigger. A spectacle. He wanted Monica to stand up in the middle of the ceremony, confess her love, and force him to make a devastating choice in front of all of you." Monica sat down heavily in her chair, shaking her head. "He planned to hesitate," I continued. "To look torn, to give me just enough hope that he might actually love me. And then, after letting me stand there like a fool, he was going to step toward her." I looked directly at Monica, and for the first time that night, there was something close to pity in my expression. "But what Monica didn't know," I said softly, "was that Alex had another plan. A backup script." The room was silent. I reached into my clutch again and pulled out the letter. A physical copy of his words. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and held it up. "This is a letter Alex wrote to Monica. One that she was never supposed to see." Monica let out a shaky breath, shaking her head. No, that's not." I turned toward the guests again. "It's long, so I'll summarize. He tells her that this wedding was never about her. That she was just the conflict. That the drama was necessary so that when he chose me, he would look like the kind of man who sacrificed. That he would seem like the guy who did the right thing even though it hurt." I let the words hang in the air. "He was never going to leave me for Monica," I said, looking directly at the investors, the powerful men who would decide whether Alex's career continued after this. "But he wanted to make all of you think he had suffered for love. He wanted to be the man who chose his fiancée out of duty, who had to let go of his one true love, because it was the right thing to do." I turned my gaze to Alex's father. "He wanted you to admire him, to respect him, to believe in him." The older man's face was unreadable. Alex's entire body had gone rigid, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Emily," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "This is enough." "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, finally turning back to him, smiling sweetly. "I'm just getting started." And then I plugged the flash drive into the projector's laptop. The screen behind us flickered to life again. Alex's real secrets. The bank accounts. The under-the-table deals. The payments disguised as charitable donations. I didn't need to narrate anymore. The numbers spoke for themselves. This wasn't just about his wedding scam anymore. This was about fraud. This was about embezzlement. This was about a career that was finished. The sound of shifting chairs filled the space. Investors were murmuring, some already pulling out their phones. Alex's boss leaned forward, his expression dark. I watched Alex as he turned to the screen, his face frozen, his breathing too fast. He hadn't known I found this part. I let out a slow breath, tilting my head. And just like that, I whispered, only loud enough for him to hear, "You're done." His head whipped toward me, fury twisting his features. "You bitch." A hand landed on his shoulder. Security. His own company's security, men who had once worked for him, now waiting for instruction. His father finally spoke, his voice cold. "You need to leave, Alex." Alex turned toward his father, his panic evident now. "Dad, please. You know this isn't." His father stood, adjusted his tie, and walked out. A death sentence. The guests began rising from their seats, the murmurs turning into something louder, something uncontrollable. The room had become a storm, a mess of whispers, of disbelief, of ruin. And Alex? He had lost. Not just me. Not just Monica. Everything. I stepped back from the podium, smoothing the fabric of my black dress. Then, without another word, I walked down the aisle, the opposite direction of the way I was meant to go. And I didn't look back. The night air hit my skin as I stepped outside, the grand entrance of the hotel now feeling like an exit from a life I had narrowly escaped. My father was waiting by the car, his expression unreadable, but there was a glint in his eyes that told me he had never doubted I would follow through. He had seen it in me before I had even seen it in myself. I wasn't the kind of woman who let men like Alex walk away unscathed. I could still hear the chaos inside. Guests murmuring, phones buzzing, the muted sound of security escorting Alex out of his own wedding. The weight of my own heartbeat was steady, my breaths even. I had done it. I had taken the script he had written for my humiliation and turned it into his destruction. But I wasn't done yet. The hotel valet stepped forward to open the car door, but I lifted a hand to stop him. "Give me a minute," I said, my voice even, my posture relaxed despite the storm I had just walked away from. My father nodded, stepping away to give me space. He knew better than to ask if I was okay. That wasn't the right question. The real question was what came next. I turned back toward the entrance, watching as figures spilled out, some lingering in groups, others rushing away like they wanted to distance themselves from the scandal that had just unfolded inside. A few eyes landed on me, hesitant, waiting to see what I would do. But the one I was waiting for hadn't appeared yet. And then, she did. Monica. She stepped outside like a woman who had just been thrown off a ledge, like someone who still hadn't decided whether she had landed safely or was still falling. Her red dress looked suffocating now, too tight, too bold, too much of a statement in a moment when she probably wanted nothing more than to disappear. She saw me instantly. And for a second, I thought she might turn back, flee into the crowd of lingering guests. But then, she squared her shoulders and walked toward me. The tension between us was thick, heavier than it had ever been. Not because we were rivals. Not because we had been fighting over the same man. But because for the first time, she was seeing the real game. And she had lost just as much as Alex had. She stopped a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold together the pieces of whatever was left of her dignity. "Was this your plan all along?" she asked, her voice quieter than I expected. I tilted my head slightly. "What part?" She let out a breath, shaking her head. "All of it. Letting me think I had won. Letting him think he had everything under control." Her eyes darkened. "Was I just another pawn to you?" Something flickered in my chest. A strange kind of sympathy. Not for the woman who had been complicit in my betrayal, but for the one who had also been played. I let a beat of silence pass before I answered. "No, you weren't a pawn. You were just another woman who thought Alex was worth something." I let my gaze drift past her, toward the entrance of the hotel where security was still dealing with the aftermath. "You were wrong." She exhaled sharply, looking away. A year ago, I might have hated her. Might have wanted her to suffer, to drown in the humiliation of tonight. But now, looking at her, all I saw was another woman who had bet on the wrong man. "I didn't know about the letter," she admitted after a moment, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I thought he was going to choose me." I nodded. "I know." Her gaze snapped back to mine. "And you let me believe it?" I lifted a shoulder. "Would you have believed me if I had told you?" She hesitated. The answer was written all over her face. No, she wouldn't have. Because she had wanted to believe in him. Just like I once had. I studied her for a moment longer before finally speaking again. Do you want to know the worst part? She swallowed, nodding. He didn't love either of us. She flinched like I had struck her, but I didn't stop. He loved what we could do for him. He loved that you were willing to chase him, that you were willing to disrupt a wedding for him. He loved that I was the perfect choice on paper, that I made him look stable, successful, trustworthy. I exhaled, watching her carefully. But he didn't love either of us. Not really. Her lips parted, her face tight with something that looked dangerously close to grief. For the first time tonight, I let myself feel a flicker of pity. Not enough to forgive her. Not enough to absolve her. But just enough to understand her. You'll survive this, I said, voice steady. But next time, pick better. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, watched as she disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the chaos of the night. And then, finally, I let myself breathe. The weight of everything settled on my shoulders, the reality of what I had just done sinking in. The fallout would be enormous. The press would be all over it. Alex's name would be dragged through the mud. His career? Over. His reputation? Destroyed. I had done exactly what I had set out to do. So why did I feel so? Proud of yourself? The voice was deep, familiar. I turned, finding my father standing a few feet away, watching me with that unreadable expression he always wore when he was thinking about something too big to put into words. I inhaled slowly, letting the night air cool the warmth in my chest. Should I be? He studied me for a long moment before shaking his head. That depends. Do you feel like you won? I let the question settle inside me. Turned it over, examined it, tried to feel it. I had taken Alex down. I had exposed him. I had burned everything he built to the ground. But had I won? I looked back at the hotel, at the lingering guests, at the wreckage of a night that was supposed to be the beginning of a new life. And then I looked at my father. I didn't win, I said slowly. I just didn't lose. His eyes flickered with something close to pride. That's enough for now. I nodded. It was. For now. He gestured toward the car. Let's go. I took one last glance at the hotel, one last deep breath of the night air. And then, without another word, I walked away. The drive away from the hotel was silent. My father didn't speak, and I didn't either. The weight of the night sat heavy in the space between us, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that existed after something irreversible had happened, after a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. The city lights blurred past the window, streaks of gold and white cutting through the darkness. I watched them absently, my mind turning over everything that had just happened, every moment leading up to it, every second of Alex's carefully built world collapsing in real time. I had thought that when I finally walked away, when I left him standing there in front of hundreds of people with nowhere to turn, I would feel something close to relief. But I didn't. I felt exhausted. I had spent months planning this, making sure every detail was perfect, ensuring there was no way for him to escape the consequences of what he had done. And now it was done. There was nothing left to fight for, no more angles to analyze, no more schemes to perfect. The game was over. And I had won. So why did I feel so? Where to? My father finally asked, breaking the silence. I blinked, refocusing. Home, I said automatically. He gave a short nod, turning the car onto the familiar route toward my apartment. I should have been relieved. My bed, my space, my life waiting for me exactly as I had left it before everything went to hell. But even as we neared the street, as my building came into view, a strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. I didn't want to be alone. Not yet. Actually, I hesitated, gripping the edge of my dress. Could we just drive for a little while? My father glanced at me, his gaze unreadable, but he didn't question it. He simply nodded and kept going, turning away from my apartment, away from the city, toward nowhere in particular. The hum of the tires on the road was strangely soothing. After a long stretch of silence, my father finally spoke. What happens now? I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the seat. For me or for him? For you. I considered that. I had spent so long preparing for this moment, setting everything into motion, making sure Alex had no way out. But I hadn't really stopped to think about what my life looked like now that I wasn't planning for war. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I just figured out. He nodded, as if that answer was good enough for him. You'll be fine. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, like it wasn't even a question. I turned my head, studying his profile. You were never worried, were you? He exhaled through his nose, the closest thing to a laugh he ever allowed. Not about you. A small smile tugged at my lips despite the exhaustion pressing down on me. He had always been like this, unshakable, certain, the kind of man who didn't waste time on doubts. And I had grown up knowing that he expected the same from me. I looked back out the window, the city slowly giving way to quieter streets, open roads. My phone vibrated in my lap. I glanced down, my stomach twisting when I saw the name. Alex. Of course. I had left him with nothing, and yet he still thought he could talk his way out of this. He still thought there was something left to say. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching as the call rang out, waiting to see if he would leave a voicemail. He didn't. But a text appeared immediately after. Emily, we need to talk. I scoffed, shaking my head. Talk? Now? After everything? The phone vibrated again. Please. I just need to explain. Explain? I let out a slow breath, debating for half a second whether I should block him, ignore him, let him drown in the mess he created. But then, Emily, you don't understand. You weren't supposed to find out this way. It wasn't just about Monica. It was bigger than that. Something in my chest tightened. I wasn't supposed to find out this way? Did that mean there was a way I was supposed to find out? I hesitated. I had done everything to make sure there were no loose ends, no surprises, nothing Alex could twist or manipulate. But something about this text, something about the way he was still reaching, still trying, set my teeth on edge. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into his games. I deleted the message, blocked his number, turned off my phone. Everything okay? My father asked. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. It didn't matter what Alex had to say. He had lost. And I wasn't looking back. The drive stretched on, the city behind us now a distant blur. I let my body relax against the seat, exhaustion finally sinking into my bones. For the first time in months, I had no plans, no strategies, nothing waiting for me except an uncertain future. And for the first time in months. That didn't scare me. By the time my father pulled back onto the city streets, the exhaustion had fully settled into my bones. My limbs felt heavy, my mind sluggish. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night had drained from my body, leaving behind something hollow and unfamiliar. I had done it. I had exposed Alex, destroyed the perfect life he had tried to craft out of deception, turned his own manipulation against him. He had walked into that wedding thinking he was untouchable, thinking that I was the one who would crumble. Instead, he was the one being escorted out in disgrace. And yet, even with all of that, even with the knowledge that he had lost, something inside me wouldn't quiet. Maybe it was the way he had reached out to me even after everything. Maybe it was the text, the one I had deleted before I could think about it too hard. It wasn't just about Monica. It was bigger than that. I had planned for everything. Hadn't I? I hadn't left room for mistakes. I had been so careful. So why did it still feel like there was something I was missing? The car slowed in front of my apartment building. My father didn't say anything as he put it in park, but he didn't move to unlock the doors either. He just sat there, watching me in that way only he could, like he could see the thoughts spinning too fast in my head. You want to tell me what's bothering you? He finally asked. I let out a breath, staring at the entrance to my building. The lobby was quiet, dimly lit through the large glass windows, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I should have wanted to go inside. I should have wanted to shut the door, crawl into bed, and finally let it all go. But I didn't move. I don't know, I admitted, my fingers curling against my lap. My father was silent for a long moment before he finally reached over and put the car back into drive. He pulled away from the curb without a word, heading back into the city. He didn't ask where I wanted to go, didn't question why I wasn't getting out. He just drove. It was the same thing he had done when I was a kid, back when I was too stubborn to admit when something was wrong. He had never been the type to push, but he had always known when I needed space. When I needed time to figure things out on my own. I leaned my head against the window, watching the lights blur past, my mind sifting through everything that had led to this night. I should have felt relief. I should have felt satisfied. So why did it still feel like something wasn't finished? My phone buzzed in my clutch, and even though I had turned it off earlier, I wasn't surprised. I didn't reach for it right away. I just waited, let the moment stretch, let the dread settle deep in my stomach before I finally pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I stared at it, heart hammering against my ribs, fingers hovering over the decline button. I had blocked Alex. And yet, the call ended, and a message popped up immediately after. Emily, you need to talk to me. This isn't over. I exhaled slowly through my nose. Of course it wasn't. Alex had spent years controlling every situation, manipulating every outcome. He wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat. But this time, he didn't have a choice. I typed out 2 words. It is. And then I turned my phone off again. No more messages. No more games. I wasn't going to let him take up any more space in my life. My father glanced at me. Everything good? I nodded. Yeah. He didn't press. He just kept driving. We passed through the city, weaving through streets I had walked 100 times before, and yet tonight, everything looked different. The buildings felt too tall, the lights too bright, the air too thick. I had spent so long looking forward, planning for this night, preparing for this moment. But now that it was here, now that Alex was gone, I wasn't sure what was left. The car finally rolled to a stop outside a small diner on the quieter side of downtown. I blinked in surprise as my father put the car in park and shut off the engine. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades, the neon sign flickering slightly, the inside dimly lit with that warm, yellow glow that always made it feel like time had slowed down. I glanced at my father. Come on, he said simply. I hesitated for half a second before finally pushing open the door and stepping into the cool night air. The bell above the door jingled softly as we walked inside, the scent of coffee and something deep-fried settling over me instantly. The place was nearly empty except for an older couple in the back and a man at the counter nursing a cup of black coffee like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The waitress barely looked up as we slid into a booth near the window. My father picked up the menu like this was any other night, like we weren't sitting in the aftermath of one of the biggest scandals the city had seen in years. You should eat, he said, flipping a page. You barely touched your food at the hotel. I scoffed. Hard to eat when you're busy ruining a man's life. The corner of his mouth twitched. You didn't ruin his life. He did that himself. I sighed, running a hand over my face. I know. I hesitated. It feels too easy. He arched a brow. Easy? I leaned back against the booth, exhaling. He's still trying to get to me. He's still trying to make me doubt myself, trying to make me think I missed something. And the worst part is, it's working. My father was silent for a moment before he finally set the menu down and met my gaze. You're waiting for him to hit back, he said simply. I swallowed hard. Because, yes, that was exactly it. Alex didn't lose. Not like this. Not without trying to pull me down with him. I had expected him to fight. And the fact that he hadn't? The fact that he had just let it happen? It didn't sit right. He's not done, I murmured. I know he's not. My father nodded slightly, as if he agreed. Then he picked up the menu again. Then make sure you see him coming. It was such a simple statement, such a quiet warning. But it was enough. I reached for the menu, pushing away the lingering unease, shoving Alex from my mind. He didn't deserve space in my thoughts. Not anymore. The waitress finally wandered over, barely looking at us as she pulled out her notepad. What can I get you? I glanced at my father before looking up at her. Coffee, I said. And pancakes. She scribbled it down and turned to my father. He closed the menu, nodding. Same. She barely acknowledged the order before walking away, leaving us in the quiet hum of the near-empty diner. I let out a slow breath, feeling something settle in my chest for the first time that night. Alex could do whatever he wanted. He could send messages. He could try to make me doubt myself. He could fight back. But I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. If he wanted a war, he would have to come find me. And I would be ready. The pancakes were warm, the coffee strong, but I barely tasted either. My father ate in silence, his presence steady as ever, but my thoughts refused to settle. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to believe Alex had no fight left in him. But I knew him. He wasn't the type to go quietly. He had spent years building his image, carefully crafting the illusion of a perfect man, a perfect fiancé, a perfect businessman. And I had torn it apart in a single night. Men like Alex didn't forgive that. My phone vibrated again, still face down on the table where I had set it earlier. I didn't reach for it immediately. I knew it wasn't Alex this time. He was blocked. But that didn't mean he wasn't finding other ways to get to me. I flipped it over and saw a new message. Unknown number. You should be careful, Emily. Not everything is as simple as you think. I inhaled slowly, setting the phone down again. My father sipped his coffee, watching me. New threat? More like a warning, I murmured. He nodded, unsurprised. He's scrambling. Yeah. I exhaled. But that's what worries me. Because Alex wasn't reckless. He wasn't the kind of man to throw empty threats around. If he was still trying to rattle me, it meant there was something else, something I hadn't uncovered yet. The thought should have terrified me. But instead, a strange sense of calm settled in my chest. Alex wanted me scared. He wanted me to doubt myself. And that meant he was still underestimating me. I glanced down at my phone again, then slowly, deliberately, I deleted the message. I think I'm done here, I said, pushing my plate away. My father gave a short nod, tossing a few bills onto the table before sliding out of the booth. I followed him outside, the night air crisp against my skin. The city felt different now, lighter, even with the weight of unfinished business lingering in the air. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I turned my phone off and tucked it into my bag. Alex could scheme. He could plot. He could wait. But so could I. He had spent so much time trying to write my story. Now it was my turn.